Yesterday evening, on the 27th of September 2024, Israel dealt the largest blow to Hezbollah since they assassinated its previous leader, Abbas al-Musawi, in 1992. They killed his successor, Hassan Nasrallah. This is a blow not only to Hezbollah, but to the axis of resistance at large. To discuss this, I'm joined today by Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, political commentator and Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's very difficult at the moment. Yesterday, the Israeli occupation made an attempt on Hassan Nasrallah's life. They were successful, as reported by the Israelis first and confirmed by Hezbollah. They hit residences in the Dahia area of Beirut with around 10 bombs. And this is only the latest in a series of assassinations on Hezbollah leader. But specifically, the magnitude of this assassination, what do you think that means for Hezbollah as a movement and the axis of resistance at large?
Well, first of all, sorry for the background noise, but I'm in someone's home because the place where I was staying was right beside a petrol station, and there was fear that the Israelis would bomb it, or there's still fear that they will bomb it. So we all moved away, and now I'm staying with a kind family who's forced to bear with me. I think it's quite clear that what the Israeli regime did was a major crime against humanity. They used a large number of bunker busters to destroy a number of residential towers. I was about 1,000 meters away from the place where the bomb struck. And I know that neighborhood pretty well because I lived near there during my sabbatical here in Beirut. I think hundreds of people died, all families, but they're not really important to the West, and they're definitely not important to the Israeli regime. So in order to murder Seyed Hassan Nasrallah, the great hero of Palestine for the Palestinian cause of our era, in order to murder him, they sacrificed hundreds of people. They were willing to slaughter hundreds of people. And if you follow Western media, you see that it doesn't bother them at all. And they're busy trying to justify these crimes. And they even tried to say that Hezbollah, repeating the Israeli narrative, that Hezbollah is embedded in the local population. They use terms like Hezbollah target sites, or they use terms like a Hezbollah stronghold to describe Dahia, southern Beirut. But the reality is that in Beirut, just like in Tel Aviv, Hezbollah has a presence. Just like in any country, in any capital in the world, there are armed forces, there are intelligence agencies. But in the case of, let's say, Israel, they don't say they're embedded in the population. But in the case of Hezbollah, they say otherwise. The Israeli regime did succeed in murdering him and a number of other people around him, obviously. But it is not going to change the equation. Hezbollah is a very powerful organization. It is a very large organization. Its members are very dedicated to the cause. They're highly educated. And they are determined to end the genocide in Gaza. Seyed Hassan entered this war willingly. In other words, Hezbollah sacrificed itself, or made sacrifices to be more precise, in order to help protect the Palestinian people of Gaza. When the genocide began, Hezbollah began fighting on the border in order to draw away a large segment of the Israeli military, thus helping Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other resistance groups to battle the enemy and also to help protect more civilians. And during the last 11 months, over 11 months, they had many martyrs, and of course, many Hezbollah supporters, civilians in Lebanon, were martyred as well. Obviously, contrary to what Hezbollah's enemies were claiming, bad faith actors, Hezbollah had a huge impact on the battle inside Palestine. Otherwise, the regime, the Israeli regime, wouldn't have carried out such harsh acts of revenge. But the important point here that I want to stress is that Beirut is the weakest link for Hezbollah. Why? Because all of the Western embassies are in Beirut. And they're all working together, gathering intelligence against the resistance. They've been doing that for decades, all Western embassies and some regional embassies. On the other hand, many of these Western NGOs, they are intelligence gathering bodies, and they're also working against Hezbollah. And Beirut is a city where people can come and go freely. In addition to that, you have a government in Lebanon that consists of different factions. Some of them are being very pro-Western. And then you also have the groups that assisted the Israelis during the 1982 invasion on Lebanon and who actually carried out a massacre in the Sabra and Shatila um, Palestinian refugee camps, which led to the slaughter of roughly 4,000 people back then. So these people are, they have militias, they are closely affiliated to Western embassies, and they are obviously working with the West against Hezbollah. So you have Western embassies, you have Western intelligence agencies, you have the Five Eyes, you have NGOs, and you have these sinister militias that slaughtered Palestinians during the previous invasion of Lebanon in 1982. So that makes Beirut much more difficult for Hezbollah to protect and also to make sure that the enemy is not able to gather intelligence. However, Hezbollah's military infrastructure, which is extensive, it's massive, and they have thousands of kilometers of underground tunnels throughout southern and central Lebanon. These are very well protected. These are very difficult for the Israeli regime to penetrate because it's not like Beirut. So if the regime does choose to invade Lebanon, it will be very difficult. And the resistance, the military wing of the resistance will definitely defeat the regime. And the collective resistance, as Ayatollah Khamenei has said today, the axis of resistance, they will all assist Hezbollah if the Israeli regime carries out the invasion, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Iraq or Syria, or of course Iran, and in the West Bank and Gaza. They're all working together to defeat this criminal regime. So I would not, those who say that the enemy has penetrated Hezbollah, anyone who's visited Beirut, anyone who knows Beirut, knows that it is very difficult to hide information from the enemy. They have so many different means to gather intelligence. And of course, Western spy planes and drones are flying alongside the Mediterranean coast, constantly gathering information, alongside, as I said earlier, the Five Eyes. So Hezbollah is it's a very difficult position. And in general, the axis of resistance is in a very difficult position. This is Iran and its allies working against the collective West. And unfortunately, regional countries have either disappointed us, like Turkey, where they continue to send oil from Baku, cheap oil from Baku to Israel, or the Emirates, which is in open betrayal, and Jordan and Egypt and other countries. So it is a heavy burden for the resistance to stand up against such a powerful enemy. It's not the Israeli regime, it is the collective West. Anyone who thinks that this is Hezbollah or the resistance against the Israeli regime really doesn't know what's going on. This is about the collective West, which is hell bent on preserving an ethno supremacist regime, which is not really, uh, it's not really one ethnicity. These people came from Europe, they came from Arab countries that are not Semites necessarily, and so they're less Semites than the indigenous Palestinian population. But that aside, um, they are hell bent, the collective West, on preserving this ethno supremacist, racist regime. And but I am confident that the axis of resistance will maintain its strength and it will gain the upper hand.
Um, we saw over these last weeks Israel continuously escalate. We started with the pager attacks on the 17th of September, and then there were several massacres after that. They killed over 700 so far, and the number is rising, obviously, with the death count with the attack from yesterday. Why would Hassan Nasrallah put himself in such a vulnerable position in Beirut when he knows how difficult it is to keep everything under wraps in terms of information and intelligence?
Well, first of all, the slaughter continues today in Dahia nearby. They are continuing to bomb residential buildings and they are bombing the city's infrastructure and slaughtering people at will. So it's been all night and today. And of course, they're doing the same across the country. There's no accountability, and the Americans, the Europeans, the British, the Germans are swiftly bringing in more ammunition, more bunker busters, and uh, the capability to continue the slaughter. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, of course, I'm not privy to secret information of Hezbollah or Iran, but I think the reason why he was based in Beirut is because he's not the military commander, he's the overall leader. So he has to deal with different political parties, he has to coordinate with different people. He works closely with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, which both have a strong presence uh, in Lebanon and are supported by Hezbollah, and of course other Palestinian factions, but also different political parties in Lebanon, especially allies of Hezbollah within the different communities. So his job is not simply to lead the defense of Lebanon or to lead the defense um, against this Zionist regime, but he is also there to coordinate politicians, different political parties, and so on. So, and maybe uh, no one expected this attack to be carried out at that time, or maybe they didn't know that the regime could penetrate so deep. I don't know that part, but I don't know what we'll find out about these things in the years to come, after the war is over, and hopefully after this Israeli regime is defeated. Gradually, we'll learn about what was happening behind the scenes. But his responsibility is not just military, so I assume that's why he was in Beirut at that time, at least.
Yesterday, Netanyahu made a speech at the United Nations, deranged genocidal speech as usual, and he then later, presumably from within the United Nations compound, made the order or gave the go ahead for this attack on Dahiya, killing many hundreds, and Hassan Nasrallah, among others, from Hezbollah. What do you think this means for international law at large?
There is no international law. Uh, Western liberal democracies have shown themselves for what they really are. They are despicable regimes that are genocidal and that are as genocidal as the Israeli regime. They are equal partners in the genocide in Gaza and the massacres that we're seeing in Lebanon and in Syria. They're regularly bombing Syria, murdering Syrians, and the West doesn't care. They allow Israel to do whatever it wants. Israel can do anything. They will help and support Israel till the last Palestinian and to the last Lebanese citizen and to the last Jordanian. That we've seen that. They've been carrying out a year of genocide in front of our eyes, and the West has not imposed any sanctions. In fact, they're just giving more and more assistance of all sorts, as I said, intelligence, ammunitions, weapons, political um, assistance, and financial aid. They're giving, and of course, media. So the West is all in on this genocide. There is no international law. There never was international law. The very existence of the Israeli regime and the fact that the West has always tried to make it thrive, despite it being a racist regime, uh, shows that international law never really meant anything. But what is happening is that the world is changing. Not only is the balance of power shifting away from the West is on economic decline, its military is declining, as we're seeing in Ukraine and with regards to its potential conflict with China. But also its soft power is being destroyed, or it has already been destroyed, because people across the world are seeing the West uh, being an equal partner in genocide. And that's, I think, one reason why in the UN, uh, so many diplomats left the hall. I think that is symbolic of a changing world. The United States and Europeans definitely did not want such scenes in the UN, but they happened. And I think that immediately afterwards, when Netanyahu carried out that crime from the UN building, he is only diminishing the Israeli regime further. The Israeli regime has lost this war. They've lost on the border with Lebanon, they've lost in Gaza, they've lost in the West Bank, and they've lost in the Red Sea. Of course, the Americans and the British are fighting on their behalf in the Red Sea, killing Yemeni uh, civilians and soldiers in order to allow Israeli shipping to go through. But they've lost, they've been defeated there, the Americans and the British. So they've lost on all fronts. Their economy has been wrecked, as we all know. But I think the most important, and their military, they have, they haven't, yes, their military and intelligence, uh, they may pretend that they've had successes, or they may have had successes, let's say, over the last few days. But their military is tired, it's worn out. And they will see in the coming weeks that they will not succeed. But the most important thing, I think, that has changed is that the world despises Israel across the global south. Even in India, things have changed. And even in the West, as I'm sure you know better than I, young people in particular, Jews, Christians, Muslims, everyone, people from all walks of life, um, they're changing. And this is devastating for the regime. It is being increasingly seen as illegitimate, and that's why Hezbollah is becoming so popular. That's why Ansarullah, which was an obscure name for most, became a hero to many people even outside the region, at least those who are politically active. So, despite the setbacks and this pain and the suffering that we're seeing, I know a couple of people who were martyred in the last 24 hours. This is very painful for everyone. But the resistance will prevail. And the resistance is determined to liberate the people of Palestine. And that will happen. Israel will not win this war. And it cannot afford not to win. If it does not win, then it has lost the war. And so far, it's clear that it is losing the war.
You mention the reactions to Israel from the global south. Yesterday, Blinken shamelessly rebuked Iran and China for selling arms to Russia when his government recently pledged to give the Israeli occupation $8.7 billion in military aid as it continues the genocide. How do you think the global south will react to this blatant hypocrisy from the United States?
I think everyone sees through it now. The world has changed. Blinken is a Zionist, and his loyalty is to Israel. In fact, Western leaders, their loyalty to Israel is greater than their loyalty to their own people. For example, the Israelis have compromised the uh, the production chains or the um, business chains for electronic goods. They they have turned electronic products into weapons. These are Western goods. This one was made in Taiwan, the other one I think maybe in Japan, but it doesn't really matter. These those no one in the West has punished the Israeli regime. So the West has allowed um, electronic goods produced by Western companies or companies belonging to regimes loyal to the West to be weaponized. That destroys Western brands. I personally and many people who I know will no longer be purchasing anything from the West because it's simply too dangerous. We'll be purchasing perhaps Chinese brands or other brands that are not compromised. The supply chains of all these companies now are are questionable to say the least. But ordinarily, if this had happened, if any other country had or any other regime had done this, there would be outrage in the West, and all the companies and the governments would be uh, out to would go to see find out who did this and severely punish them. But in the case of Israel, they let them get away with it. So they are hurting their own brand because people no longer trust these companies, and they let the Israeli regime do this sort of thing. So the Israelis are always sacrificing the West for their own selfish gains, and the West is always sacrificing, Western regimes are sacrificing their own people for the Israeli regime. And Blinken is just one of those people. He is a Zionist, and his interests are more about preserving the Israeli regime than about strengthening the United States.
The United States administration has been continuously calling for calm, at least in public. They are uh, they at least they don't seem to want a regional war. They say they're working towards a ceasefire agreement, and then Israel goes ahead and starts this escalation with Hezbollah in the north. Hezbollah obviously is much more powerful than Hamas. Uh, why would Israel go ahead with this escalation in the north and then go and assassinate the leader of the largest and most powerful resistance faction in the region?
Well, this is in response to the fact that Netanyahu is very unpopular, and he knows that if he is forced to step down at some point, he'll probably go to jail for corruption charges. Not because of the genocide. The Israelis support the genocide. His right wing fanatical allies support the genocide, and his liberal opposition, for the most part, supports the genocide. We should not be under any illusion that his opponents, his political opponents, are any better than him. But he either has to continue the war or escalate. And when you continue a war after a year and nothing happens, then I think you have to escalate. You either have to ultimately end it or you have to escalate. And that, I think it was predictable that he would escalate. Maybe different people would have different views on when the Israeli regime would escalate or how it would escalate or how far it would escalate. But I think right now there's a very high chance that the regime will actually invade southern Lebanon. So we're going to see probably very heavy fighting in the days and weeks ahead here. And of course, the airstrikes continue, the slaughter of civilians continue across the country, and the Western media will do as much as possible to hide this from their own people and from the international community. And it is our responsibility to constantly uh, keep people aware about the genocide, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the massacres in Lebanon, and of course the regular aggressions on Syria. Syria, of course, the reason why the regime constantly bombs it is because Syria is a sort of victory bridge that links Iran to Lebanon. And of course, the assistance that goes to the West Bank most probably goes through Syria, although I'm not privy to this sort of thing, this sort of information, and of course Lebanon as well. And that's why they actually carried out the dirty war in Syria. NATO led it. Now anyone, back then a lot of people viewed the world differently, even though I think it was pretty clear back then what was happening. But NATO wanted to undermine Syria because they wanted to cut the link between Iran and Lebanon and Palestine. And by doing that, they could much more easily defeat Hamas and, of course, hurt and Hezbollah and the Islamic Jihad and the other groups in the West Bank that are very active. But they failed. So NATO carried out this dirty war. They empowered ISIS and Al Qaeda. We all know that Jake Sullivan, the current national security advisor, and the Zionist said on February the 12th, 2012, in an email to Hillary Clinton that in Syria, Al Qaeda is on our side. And of course, they brought about the empowerment of ISIS. John Kerry, the Secretary of State at that time, said we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. And Obama even said that in an interview, I think, in the Atlantic magazine, that they allowed ISIS to advance on Baghdad in order to put pressure on the prime minister. So the West used these extremist groups, terror groups, to destroy Syria. And sadly, countries in the region, they did a deal with the devil. But today, Syria remains a very important part of the Axis, and it allows assistance to go to the resistance in different parts of the region.
Returning to Hezbollah, while Hassan Nasrallah is possibly the largest blow to Hezbollah as a resistance movement, he's not the first top commander to be assassinated. We've been seeing many assassinations going all the way back to July with Fuad Shukr. But Hezbollah has not been has not struck Israel where it hurts, so to speak. So now that Israel has gone so far as to assassinate the leader of Hezbollah, is the resistance likely to hit back in a way that hurts Israel?
Well, it has been hurting Israel throughout this 11 or so months. But yes, after the escalation, I would say that the resistance did not escalate as far as the Israeli regime did. But I think that will change, and we'll see in the coming weeks that the fighting will become very intense, and the Israeli regime will pay a significant price for this. Israel will not win, have no doubt about that. And these are painful times. Watching footage of children in Gaza, we've been seeing that for almost a year now. I wake up in the morning one of the first things I see are clips of kids in Gaza being killed. I try to tweet them as often as I can just to remind people, not to depress them, but to remind people that this is ongoing. And now we see these horrific massacres taking place in Lebanon. As I said yesterday evening, the intensity of the strike was extraordinary. And on apartment blocks, apartment towers, full of women and children, like the child who is, we may be able to hear in the room next door, who have no comprehension of politics or anything, and just devastate all of them. I think a husband and wife, I'm pretty sure that a young husband and wife that I know were living in one of those apartment towers because they are no longer, the husband, who's a young friend of myself, is no longer responding to messages. So this is the reality that we're living in. We are facing a. We have to always remember that the resistance is facing a far more powerful enemy. The enemy is not Israel. Israel is just a colony, an evil colony. But this is the collective West that is doing everything possible to help this evil regime. But the resistance will prevail. Uh, the Israeli regime will not win. And once it is clear that it cannot win, I think that we'll be moving more rapidly towards the regime's demise. It may take time, but it will happen.
You've mentioned that Hezbollah is not necessarily popular with everyone in Lebanon. There are opponents to Hezbollah, the resistance, etc. But how do you see the Lebanese street reacting to the initial escalation and now to the assassination of the leader of Hezbollah?
Well, actually, over the last year, the popularity of Hezbollah has grown. Many of the political factions that had differences and politicians that had differences have been tilting towards Hezbollah. And I think some of them are looking at the events in Syria in a different way than they did before. They recognize that the logic of Hezbollah about preventing ISIS and Al Qaeda from taking regional capitals, and the fact that Western intelligence agencies were behind that dirty war, they're beginning to see why the West was doing that, and they see that Hezbollah is the most sincere of any group to defend the Palestinians. Remember, what Hezbollah did was that it voluntarily entered this war. It didn't have to. It could have cut a deal with the West or with the regime, but it felt obligated to help the people of Gaza, to help the resistance in Gaza, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, others, in defending themselves and their people. And they paid a heavy price over the last year, and now over the last couple of weeks, an extraordinarily huge price. And this extraordinarily huge price shows that what they've been doing over the last year was very important. So now the political parties are and communities have tilted towards Hezbollah, but there are those who will always be enemies of Hezbollah. ISIS is still active in the north of Lebanon, and we know that ISIS is deeply infiltrated by Western agencies, Israel, and allies of the West. And then we have people like Samir Jaja, who is the head of the Lebanese forces, the militia that I told you about earlier that carried out the massacre in the Palestinian camps in Sabra and Shatila, which led within less than 2 days, almost 4,000 people were massacred in 1982 under Israeli supervision. In other words, the Israelis surrounded the camp, these militias entered the camp and just massacred everyone there, women and children. Israel hasn't changed. This is the same Israel of 1982. They massacre people, and in 1982, the West supported Israel, and now they support Israel. If in a country opposed to the United States, a person is arrested, someone that the West likes, they will sanction the government. But the Israelis can slaughter day and night and absolutely nothing will happen.
Um, Obviously, one big actor which connects the axis of resistance is Iran. Many, though, have criticized Iran for its supposed inaction since the start of the US Israeli genocide of Gaza, especially with how bad Hezbollah has been hit in the last few weeks. Where is Iran in all of this?
I think that is something that we've been hearing a lot, but I think it's also very unfair. The ability for Hamas and its allies to defend Gaza comes from Iran at a huge cost. All those hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, very sophisticated. Remember during the first days of the genocide, the Israelis were saying they're going to pour seawater into the tunnels or poisonous gas. They couldn't because they were so sophisticated and advanced. Obviously, that funding, the engineering, the logistical support came from somewhere, and that was Iran, or the military capability. And Iran continues to support the resistance. As we speak, they receive supplies through their tunnels and their extensive underground network. So that is no small thing. Ansarullah is imposing the siege on the Israelis and now the Americans and the British, and among some other countries, in the Red Sea with the assistance of Iran. The missile capability is becoming indigenous, and there are other capabilities. But of course, it's Iranian support, and Iranian supplies, and Iranian technology that is and funding that is a part of this. The same is true in Lebanon. And as I said, the underground network, military network, the tunnels, the thousands of kilometers. They have huge missile sites that the Israelis have absolutely no access to. This is very different from Beirut, which I said is a special case. If, when the time comes, then we'll see what Iran has done in Lebanon as well. And of course, Syria, because the border between uh, Israel and Syria is very sensitive. The heights are the Syrian Golan are occupied illegally, of course, by the Israeli regime, but they have to make sure that the Israeli regime cannot advance on Damascus or on Lebanon from inside Syria. And of course, Syria has many difficulties because third of the country is occupied by the Americans and their allies in the east and northeast of the country, and Al Qaeda and their allies, and unfortunately the Turkish government in the north of the country. So they are spread out and sanctioned, but Iran has to help them make sure that Israel cannot advance. And of course, you have the resistance in Iraq, which has played a very important role. They've been firing drones and missiles, and if the war expands, then the Americans should be very worried because if they become involved, then all of their assets in Iraq will be overrun. So, this is a huge project. But I think as Iran responded to the strike on the embassy, Iran will respond to the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh. But also, if Iran will definitely strike the Israeli regime very hard to protect the resistance. Iran will not allow Hezbollah to fail, Iran will not allow uh, Gaza or the West Bank to fail, come what may.
Some people have actually criticized
And by the
Iran.
way, all of these maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, which have hurt people, ordinary people significantly, they're about Palestine. They have nothing to do with a nuclear program or human rights or whatever else, whatever other excuse they make up. This is all about Iran's support for Palestine and its opposition to the Israeli regime. So Iran both supports the resistance and is punished for supporting the resistance. and that has a huge impact on, or significant impact on people's lives in the country. But it is a principle. But as I said, I think that the role of Iran will increase with escalation.
Some uh, have taken into account the assassinations and they go further in their criticism of Iran. They point, they claim that actually Iran is moving away from the resistance. They are leaving the resistance to fend for itself, and they point to the assassinations of Haniya, Fuad Shukr, now Nasrallah. They point to the new Iranian president Pezeshkian's conciliatory tone to the United States as evidence of this. How would you respond to the claim that Iran has left the resistance to fend for itself?
That's not true at all. And I think in this strike where they slaughtered all these people, they also murdered a senior Iranian commander. I think that's been confirmed. I'm not sure right now. If you've seen that, I've been doing so many interviews that I'm behind, far behind everyone else with the current events. But Iran is making, Iran continues to support the resistance. And today the leader made a very strong statement about supporting the resistance and how all of the factions or all of the collective resistance will come together to support Hezbollah during the coming days and weeks and months. So I don't consider that to be true. President Pezeshkian, it's difficult to explain this unless you know Persian, but President Pezeshkian is not a very good speaker. He speaks like an ordinary person. He's highly educated. He's uh, a physician, uh, but I think he's a heart surgeon. But he is not a very capable speaker, and he's not a politician. He's really not a politician. And some of the statements that he made in the United States, I think he did not intend it to sound that way. And of course, the Western media and the regional media that's with the West, you know who they are. They will twist his words and that sort of thing. I think he made some important mistakes. I think some of the people around him are to blame, but they're not intentional. It's clear to me that he misspoke on a number of occasions, and it was interpreted in a way in which created that image for some people, as you pointed out. But I think, again, in the days, weeks, and months ahead, we'll be seeing that Iran will fully support Hamas. Iran will not allow Gaza to fall, and Iran will fully support Hezbollah. It will not allow the Israeli regime to take a square meter of Lebanon.
On a final note, do you think that there is still an opportunity to de escalate, or has Israel, with its massacres not only in Gaza but also in the West Bank and in Lebanon, do you think that we have passed the point of no return?
You mean with regards to the future of the region?
With regards to the future of the region, with regards to a regional all out war?
It is possible. But if there is a regional war, and the Americans enter, because that would mean that would be a regional war. If Iran and Israel get into direct conflict, Iran will batter the regime badly, and the only thing that can save it would be the United States. If the Americans want to enter the war, then all of their assets in Iraq will be destroyed. The resistance in Iraq would overrun them, and in Syria. And of course, their bases in the Persian Gulf would be gone, but so would those regimes in the Persian Gulf that host those bases, because they'll be seen as hostile. If the Americans attack Iran, then all those family dictatorships that host these bases, they are in serious trouble. Their gas and oil installations will be gone. So I don't think the Americans want that. I don't think the Americans uh, are ignorant about the economic consequences it would have for the United States and the global economy. It would be worse than the 1929 depression, far worse, in my opinion. So at this stage, it's difficult to. I think it's still. Let's say I think the chances are that we won't see a regional war to that extent. But if Iran strikes Israel and Israel strikes back, Iran will strike again and again until the Israeli regime is punished adequately and deterrence is created. So, in a sense, yes, we have reached a point of no return. But if you mean the whole region and the worst case scenario that I mentioned, that I don't know. But ultimately, the Israeli regime will have to accept a ceasefire, and it will have gained nothing. And despite all the slaughter that we've seen, and all the deaths of children and young girls and boys that we've been seeing over the last few days and the last year, and over the many years in what we've been seeing in Palestine and across the region, the menace that the West and Israel have created is not just in Palestine, it's not just in Syria, it's in Iraq. The war in Iraq, the Israelis were very much behind the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. Uh, and Libya and elsewhere, and Yemen, this menace, this regime, if it once it is forced to accept a ceasefire, then it will be severely diminished. And I think many Israelis will leave because the economy will never recover. No one is ever going to invest in Israel again. And so many of the elites, the smart, the intelligent people, business people, they'll leave. And the more fanatical Israelis will probably stay, but the regime will decline. So I'm optimistic about the future, although these are days of pain and suffering. But I am confident that Palestine will be liberated and Palestinians will be able to live in their land as equal human beings, and they will all be able to return home.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for joining us today. I pray for your safety whilst you spend time in Beirut, and I hope we can speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more conversations like this, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.